Military uniforms are just costumes for kids playing dress-up now, huh? Sergeant Derek Blackwood's voice cut through the Friday evening buzz at Fort Braxton's main canteen like a serrated blade, making every head in the crowded space turn toward the small woman standing near the serving counter. His words carried that particular brand of cruelty that comes from someone who's never had to question their own place in the world. Victoria Kane stood frozen, her porcelain skin flushing slightly, as 200 pairs of eyes fixed on her. With her long blonde hair tied in a messy high bun, loose curls framing her face, and those captivating blue eyes that seemed almost too large for her delicate features, she looked like a princess who had somehow wandered into a war zone. The fitted light gray t-shirt and slim dark military pants she wore beneath her oversized uniform jacket only emphasized how out of place she seemed among the battle-hardened soldiers surrounding her. "Seriously?" Derek continued, his 6'4" frame towering over her as he took a step closer, his muscled physique rippling beneath the green camouflage uniform that marked him as elite infantry. "Who authorized this little fashion show? This is a military installation, not some community theater production." The laughter that erupted from his squad was harsh and immediate, phones already appearing in hands, ready to capture what promised to be prime social media entertainment. In the shadowy corner booth near the emergency exit, Captain Ryan Cross lowered his newspaper just enough to observe the unfolding scene with cold, calculating eyes. After 3 months of careful surveillance, he was finally getting the opportunity to confirm what Shadow Protocol suspected about the seemingly innocuous woman who had appeared on their radar. His fingers moved imperceptibly, activating the recording device concealed in his jacket. Victoria remained perfectly still, her small hands trembling slightly as she clutched a paper napkin. Her gaze dropped to the floor in what appeared to be shame, shoulders hunching forward in a posture that screamed vulnerability. Every instinct in the room read her as harmless, ordinary, completely overwhelmed by the aggressive attention. But in exactly 18 minutes, when Derek would push too far and demand she remove that fraudulent uniform, everyone in Fort Braxton would discover they had just witnessed the prelude to the most catastrophic mistake of their military careers. And when the tattoo on Victoria's back was finally revealed, the entire base would fall silent as death. Derek's squad closed ranks around Victoria like a pack of wolves sensing weakness. Lieutenant Ashley Garcia, her perfectly styled black hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, stepped forward with the practiced precision of someone who had built her entire identity around being the most intimidating woman in any room. "Oh my God," Garcia said, her voice dripping with theatrical concern as she circled Victoria like a predator. "Sweetie, are you lost? The costume party is probably at the community center downtown, not on a federal military installation." Her words triggered another wave of laughter, several soldiers pulling out their phones to record what they assumed would be viral content. Victoria's response was barely audible, her voice soft and uncertain. I have orders to report here." "Orders?" Derek's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "From who? Your mommy? Your drama teacher?" He gestured broadly to his audience, playing to the crowd with practiced ease. "Look at this, people. We've got ourselves a lost little princess wearing daddy's clothes." The mockery should have been devastating. Any normal person would have fled, tears streaming, dignity in tatters, but Victoria simply stood there, absorbing each insult with an unnatural stillness that only the most observant would recognize as tactical patience. What the jeering crowd couldn't see was how Victoria's eyes moved in controlled sweeps, automatically cataloging exits, counting personnel, assessing threat levels. Her feet, despite the apparent trembling, had shifted into a perfect, balanced stance. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, even as her hands shook with what everyone assumed was fear. Cross noticed. His trained eye caught the micro-movements, the subtle signs that suggested this woman was far more dangerous than her appearance indicated. He made a mental note to increase surveillance protocols immediately. If you're feeling that familiar burn of anger watching Victoria get treated like this, hit that like button right now. Stories like these remind us why we need to look deeper than surface appearances. I'm curious, though. Where are you watching this from? Are you tuning in from the States, maybe overseas, or somewhere completely different? Drop your location in the comments because I love seeing how these powerful stories reach people all around the world. Corporal Blake Miller, a weapons specialist with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite, decided to join the entertainment. "Hey, princess," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You know basic drill commands, right? Since you're wearing our uniform and all?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a discharged weapon. Miller expected hesitation, confusion, maybe even tears. What he got instead made him take an involuntary step backward. "Yes, Corporal," Victoria replied, her voice suddenly crisp and clear. She snapped to attention with movements so precise, so perfectly executed, that the laughter began to falter. Her posture transformed from cowering civilian to textbook military bearing in the space of a heartbeat. "About face," Miller commanded, certain he could trip her up. Victoria executed the movement flawlessly, her combat boots clicking against the concrete floor with parade ground precision. The timing was perfect, the execution without flaw. "Present arms," Miller continued, his confidence wavering slightly. Without hesitation, Victoria brought her hands up in the exact position required for presenting an imaginary rifle, her form so perfect it could have been used as a training demonstration. The casual chatter in the canteen began to die as more soldiers noticed something wasn't quite right about this supposedly helpless woman. Derek sensed the shift in atmosphere and moved quickly to regain control. "Lucky guess," he declared loudly. "Anyone can memorize a few moves from YouTube videos, but let's see how you handle real equipment." He unholstered his sidearm, ejecting the magazine and clearing the chamber with theatrical flair before extending the empty weapon toward Victoria. "Field strip and reassemble, 30 seconds. It was meant to be an impossible challenge, designed to humiliate and expose her as a fraud. Military weapons were complex precision instruments that took months of training to handle competently. No civilian could possibly. Victoria's hands moved like liquid lightning. The weapon came apart in her grasp with a series of soft clicks and mechanical whispers that spoke of absolute familiarity. Spring, barrel, slide, frame. Each component was removed with surgical precision and laid out in perfect order on the nearby table. The watching soldiers leaned forward despite themselves, caught between disbelief and growing unease. 15 seconds. That was all it had taken her to completely disassemble a service pistol that many of them still struggled with after months of training. The reassembly was even more impressive. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, muscle memory guiding each motion as the weapon reformed in her hands. Click, snap, slide. In 12 seconds, the pistol was whole again, the action smooth as silk as she tested the mechanism before safely returning it to Derek. Total time, 27 seconds. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at the weapon in his hands as if it might bite him, his confident smirk replaced by something approaching confusion. Garcia's mouth had fallen open, her practiced superiority momentarily shattered. Miller was frantically trying to remember if he had ever seen anyone, including instructors, handle a weapon with that level of effortless competence. "Beginner's luck," Derek said finally, but his voice lacked conviction. "Anyone can take apart a pistol if they've watched enough action movies." Victoria said nothing. She simply returned to her previous position, hands clasped behind her back, eyes downcast as if the last 30 seconds had never happened. But Cross had seen enough. He discreetly activated his encrypted phone, sending a brief message to handlers who operated in shadows deeper than military intelligence. "Target demonstrating advanced capabilities. Request immediate analysis. Private Connor Anderson, barely 19 and still soft around the edges despite 3 months of basic training, felt something twist uncomfortably in his stomach as he watched the treatment Victoria was receiving. Unlike the others, Anderson came from a family where respect was earned through character, not intimidation. His grandfather had been a Marine at Iwo Jima, and the old man would have been disgusted by what was happening here. "Maybe we should just leave her alone," Anderson said quietly, but his words carried in the sudden stillness of the canteen. Derek's head snapped around like a striking snake. "What was that, Private?" "I said maybe we should leave her alone, Sergeant," Anderson repeated, his voice stronger now despite the tremor of fear. "She's not bothering anyone." "Oh, look at that," Garcia said, her smile turning predatory. "The newbie's got a crush on our little dress-up doll. How sweet." Her voice was poison wrapped in silk, designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. Derek's expression darkened as he recognized a challenge to his authority. In his world, respect was a zero-sum game. Any kindness shown to his target was a direct attack on his position. "Private Anderson, since you're so concerned about our guest's feelings, maybe you'd like to join her for whatever comes next." The threat was clear, and Anderson felt his resolve waver. But when he looked at Victoria, saw the way she stood with quiet dignity despite the abuse being heaped on her, something in his grandfather's teachings clicked into place. "Yes, Sergeant, if that's what it takes." For just a moment, Victoria's eyes flicked up to meet Anderson's, and he saw something there that made his breath catch. Not gratitude, not relief, but a kind of ancient, weary recognition. As if she had seen this scenario play out countless times before and knew exactly how it would end. The canteen had grown unnaturally quiet now, the usual Friday evening chaos replaced by the tense anticipation that precedes violence. Soldiers who had been laughing minutes before now sensed they were witnessing something that might have consequences far beyond simple entertainment. Colonel James Thompson chose that moment to enter the canteen, his weathered face scanning the room with the automatic assessment of a career officer. At 55, Thompson had seen action in 3 different conflicts and possessed the kind of situational awareness that came from decades of making life-or-death decisions. He immediately noticed the crowd formation, the cell phones, the palpable tension radiating from the center of the room. "What's the situation here?" Thompson's voice cut through the noise like a blade, carrying 30 years of command authority. Derek snapped to attention, but his smile remained confident. "Just conducting an impromptu inspection, sir. Checking to make sure personnel are properly authorized to wear military uniforms on base." Thompson's gaze moved to Victoria, taking in her oversized jacket, her civilian clothes beneath, her obvious discomfort. To his experienced eye, she looked like exactly what Derek claimed, a confused civilian who had somehow ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. "Ma'am," Thompson said, his voice not unkind but carrying the weight of official inquiry. "Do you have proper authorization to be on this installation?" Victoria reached into her jacket pocket with movements so careful they seemed choreographed, producing a slightly crumpled set of papers. "Yes, sir. Orders to report for temporary duty assignment." Thompson accepted the documents, his expression growing increasingly puzzled as he read. The orders appeared legitimate, bearing all the correct signatures and authorization codes, but something about them seemed off. The assignment details were vague, the reporting structure unclear. It was the kind of paperwork that raised more questions than it answered. "These orders are unusual," Thompson said slowly, his military mind automatically flagging inconsistencies. "The authorization codes are correct, but the assignment parameters are classified above my clearance level." Derek's confidence flickered for the first time. In his experience, confused civilians didn't carry classified military orders with authorization codes that stumped full colonels. Cross leaned forward slightly in his corner booth, his trained ear catching every word of the exchange. Shadow Protocol had been tracking whispers of deep cover operatives for months, agents so deeply embedded that their true identities were known only to the highest levels of military intelligence. If this woman was what they suspected, the implications were staggering. "Sir," Garcia interjected, sensing Derek's uncertainty and moving to support her superior. "With respect, those documents could be forgeries. Identity theft is a serious problem these days, and military credentials are valuable on the black market." It was a reasonable concern, and Thompson nodded slowly. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify these orders through proper channels. Until then, I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to remain here under supervision." Victoria simply nodded, her compliance so complete it seemed almost rehearsed. But Anderson noticed something the others missed. The way her eyes moved as Thompson spoke, cataloging the positions of every person in the room. calculating angles and distances with the unconscious precision of someone trained in close-quarters combat. "In the meantime," Derek said, seizing the opportunity to regain control of the situation, "maybe our guest wouldn't mind demonstrating some more of those impressive skills she showed us earlier." His voice carried a dangerous edge now, the tone of someone who had decided that subtlety was no longer necessary. Miller stepped forward, producing his own sidearm. "How about we move up to the M4 carbine? More complex weapon system, harder to fake your way through." He gestured toward the arms locker, where several training weapons were secured behind reinforced glass. "That's not necessary," Thompson began, but Derek was already moving toward the locker, his squad falling in behind him with the coordinated movement of a pack that had caught the scent of blood. "Oh, but I think it is necessary, sir," Derek said, his voice respectful to Thompson, but carrying an undertone that suggested he would not be deterred. "If this woman is going to wear our uniform on our base, she should be able to handle our equipment. It's a matter of unit integrity." The logic was sound enough to make Thompson hesitate. Unit integrity was indeed sacred in military culture, and Derek's concerns, while aggressively presented, weren't entirely unreasonable. The M4 carbine that Miller retrieved from the training locker was a standard-issue weapon, familiar to every soldier in the room. It was also significantly more complex than the sidearm Victoria had handled earlier, with multiple subsystems and a field stripping procedure that required both knowledge and experience to execute properly. 18 seconds, Derek announced, consulting his watch with theatrical precision. "That's the current base record for complete disassembly and reassembly. Think you can beat it, Princess?" The challenge was impossible. Even experienced soldiers rarely broke the 20-second mark, and the base record belonged to Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a weapons instructor with 15 years of experience. Derek was essentially asking Victoria to perform a miracle, and everyone in the room knew it. Victoria approached the weapon table with measured steps, her small hands reaching for the carbine with movements that seemed almost reluctant. The watching crowd pressed closer, phones recording, everyone expecting to witness the moment when the pretense finally crumbled. She lifted the M4 with both hands, checking the chamber and confirming the weapon was safe with movements so automatic they seemed unconscious. Her fingers found the takedown pins, and the familiar ritual began. Upper receivers separated from lower with a soft click. Bolt carrier group extracted with mechanical precision. Buffer spring removed without the fumbling that usually characterized amateur attempts. Each component was placed on the table in perfect order, the disassembly flowing like a carefully choreographed dance. The crowd grew quiet as they realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Victoria's hands moved with the kind of fluid certainty that spoke of thousands of repetitions, muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought was unnecessary. 8 seconds for complete disassembly. The reassembly was poetry in motion. Components flowed together as if magnetized, each part finding its proper place without hesitation or adjustment. The final takedown pins snapped home with a sound like a closing door, and Victoria stepped back from a fully assembled weapon. Total time, 16 seconds. A new base record. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Derek stared at the stopwatch in his hand as if it had personally betrayed him, while Garcia's face cycled through expressions of disbelief, confusion, and growing unease. Thompson stepped forward, his experienced eye examining the weapon Victoria had assembled. Every component was in perfect position, the action smooth as silk when he tested it. This wasn't luck or YouTube knowledge. This was the kind of competence that came from intensive professional training. "Where did you learn to do that?" Thompson asked quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested the answer might be more important than anyone realized. Victoria's response was barely audible, delivered to the floor rather than to her questioner. "Practice, sir." But Cross had heard enough. He activated his phone again, this time placing a call to a number that didn't officially exist. When the connection opened, he spoke in a voice too low for anyone else to hear. "Priority alert. Target has demonstrated advanced weapons proficiency. Request immediate background analysis and extraction protocols." The response was immediate. "Understood." Maintain surveillance. Do not engage until identity is confirmed. Derek's confidence was cracking now. The carefully constructed narrative of superior dealing with inferior, beginning to crumble in the face of evidence he couldn't explain away. But rather than backing down, he chose to escalate, his psychological makeup requiring him to maintain dominance at any cost. "Neat trick," he said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that fooled no one. "But handling weapons is only part of being a soldier. Let's see how you do with some real military knowledge." He began firing questions in rapid succession, each one designed to expose supposed civilian ignorance. What's the effective range of an M4 carbine? What's the standard load for a combat medic? How do you call for close air support in a danger-close situation? The questions came like machine gun fire, each one technical enough to stump most civilians and many soldiers. But Victoria answered them all, her responses crisp and precise, delivered with the kind of casual confidence that suggested the information was so basic it hardly required conscious thought. 550 meters point target, 600 meters area target, she began, her voice gaining strength with each answer. Combat medic carries IV fluids, trauma bandages, morphine auto-injectors, and quick-clot hemostatic agents. Danger-close air support requires authentication with higher command, precise target coordinates, and personnel accountability within the blast radius. Her answers weren't just correct, they were exhaustively complete, delivered with the kind of detail that spoke of advanced training and real-world experience. Garcia found herself taking notes, trying to remember information that Victoria rattled off without apparent effort. Miller decided to try a different approach, pulling out his smartphone and accessing a military database. "Okay, let's try some current tactical scenarios. You're pinned down by sniper fire from an elevated position. Your squad is taking casualties. How do you respond?" It was a complex scenario that required understanding of advanced tactical principles, the kind of question used in staff college examinations. Victoria didn't hesitate. Identify sniper position through muzzle flash and impact analysis. Deploy smoke for concealment while moving casualties to hard cover. Establish suppressive fire with squad automatic weapons to fix the sniper in position. Call for counter-sniper support or close air support depending on available assets. If neither available, coordinate flanking maneuver using available terrain while maintaining base of fire. The answer was textbook perfect, delivered with the casual confidence of someone who had faced exactly this scenario in real combat conditions. Miller found himself nodding along, recognizing the sound, tactical thinking, even as he wondered where a supposed civilian could have learned such advanced concepts. Victoria adjusted the military-grade fitness tracking device on her wrist with movements that spoke of long familiarity with specialized equipment. The ruggedized smartwatch wasn't just monitoring her heart rate and sleep patterns. It integrated GPS navigation capabilities with water resistance rated to depths of over 100 meters. Advanced sensor technology tracked stress levels and recovery time following high-intensity activities, essential for personnel operating in high-pressure environments. The device represented the kind of cutting-edge health monitoring technology that military professionals and medical specialists relied on for optimal performance in demanding conditions. The demonstration was becoming uncomfortable for everyone involved. Each question designed to expose Victoria as a fraud, instead revealed depths of knowledge that seemed impossible for a civilian to possess. Derek's squad exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier confidence replaced by growing unease. Thompson felt the situation shifting beneath his feet like quicksand. His military instincts were screaming warnings, but he couldn't quite identify the source of his concern. The woman standing before him looked harmless enough, yet she had just demonstrated weapons proficiency that exceeded most of his seasoned soldiers, and tactical knowledge that belonged in advanced military academies. Cross received another encrypted message, this one containing preliminary background analysis that made his blood run cold. The facial recognition algorithms had found something, a partial match buried in classified databases that shouldn't have been accessible to Shadow Protocol. If the analysis was correct, they had just stumbled onto something far more significant than a simple surveillance operation. "Let's try field medicine," Garcia suggested, pulling a first aid kit from behind the serving counter. Any real soldier should know basic trauma care. She was grasping for something, anything, that might restore the natural order where she and her colleagues were superior, and this small woman was properly subordinate. The medical kit Garcia produced was standard military issue, containing everything from pressure bandages to emergency airways. She selected a complex trauma scenario, the kind that would challenge even trained medics. Soldier takes shrapnel to the thigh, severing the femoral artery. He's conscious but losing blood fast. You've got maybe 3 minutes before he bleeds out. What do? It was a brutal scenario, one that required not just theoretical knowledge, but the kind of calm precision that came from seeing real combat wounds. Garcia expected hesitation, maybe even revulsion from someone who was supposedly a civilian. Instead, Victoria moved with the fluid efficiency of a trauma surgeon. Her hands located the pressure points immediately, applying direct pressure with exactly the right amount of force. Control bleeding with direct pressure proximal to the wound, she said, her voice steady and clinical. Apply tourniquet 2 inches above the injury site. Tighten until pulse disappears distal to the wound. Treat for shock by elevating the legs and maintaining body temperature. Establish IV access and administer fluid replacement. Prepare for emergency evacuation. As she spoke, her hands demonstrated each procedure on the training mannequin with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. But it was the casual competence that caught everyone's attention. The way she handled the medical equipment like it was an extension of her own body. The automatic muscle memory that spoke of extensive training under pressure. Time to pulse stop. 45 seconds, Victoria added, checking her watch with the kind of clinical precision that belonged in an emergency room. Patient stabilized for transport. The performance was flawless, executed with a level of skill that would have impressed military medics with years of field experience. Garcia stared at the mannequin, then at Victoria, then back at the mannequin, her mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. That skill demonstration just gave you chills, didn't it? If you're starting to suspect Victoria isn't who she appears to be, smash that subscribe button. Trust me, what's coming next will completely blow your mind. And hey, ring that notification bell because you won't want to miss a single second of this revelation. Anderson watched the proceedings with growing amazement and mounting concern. His initial sympathy for Victoria was evolving into something approaching awe, mixed with the uncomfortable realization that he had no idea who this woman really was. The casual competence she displayed wasn't normal. It was the kind of skill set that belonged to elite operators, the kind of people whose very existence was classified. Derek sensed the situation slipping away from him entirely, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling in the face of evidence he couldn't explain or dismiss. But rather than accepting defeat, his psychological makeup demanded escalation. If he couldn't prove Victoria was incompetent, he would prove she was dangerous. Interesting skills for a civilian, he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Makes me wonder where someone picks up that kind of training. Special schools maybe? Private military contractors? Or maybe somewhere even more unofficial? The implications were clear, and Thompson felt his concern ratcheting up another notch. Derek was essentially accusing Victoria of being some kind of covert operative, which seemed absurd given her appearance, but increasingly plausible given her demonstrated capabilities. "Sergeant," Thompson warned, "you're heading into territory that requires more than speculation." But Derek was beyond listening to warnings, his need to maintain dominance overriding his better judgment. "Sir, with respect, we have an unidentified individual with advanced combat training on our base, carrying questionable orders and demonstrating skills that most of our own soldiers don't possess. At what point do we start asking harder questions?" It was a reasonable concern, delivered in the kind of aggressive tone that made it feel like an attack. Victoria stood quietly through the exchange, her posture remaining submissive, even as her demonstrated competence suggested she was anything but helpless. Cross made his decision. The preliminary background analysis had raised enough red flags to justify immediate action. He rose from his corner booth with movements calculated to draw no attention, beginning a careful approach toward the main group, while maintaining the appearance of casual interest. Miller decided to try one final test, something so specialized that no civilian could possibly have the required knowledge. "Land navigation," he announced, pulling out a topographical map of the local area. "Plot a course from here to Checkpoint Alpha, avoiding known patrol routes and maintaining concealment from observation posts." It was a complex military exercise that required understanding of terrain analysis, enemy capabilities, and tactical movement principles. The map he spread on the table was covered with military symbols and elevation markers that would be meaningless to anyone without extensive training. Victoria studied the map for exactly 15 seconds, her eyes moving in systematic patterns that suggested she was processing information according to established protocols. Then she began marking waypoints with a confidence that made Thompson lean forward with sharp attention. "Primary route follows this ridgeline to maintain elevation and avoid the observation post at grid 279er, she said, her finger tracing a path across the map with absolute certainty. Alternate route uses this stream bed for concealment, but increases travel time by approximately 40 minutes. Emergency extraction point here, with fallback rally point at this elevation." The route she plotted was tactically sound, taking advantage of terrain features that would provide concealment while avoiding known observation points. But more than that, it demonstrated an understanding of military movement principles that belonged in advanced infantry schools, not civilian experience. Thompson found himself studying the route with professional interest, recognizing the sophisticated tactical thinking involved. This wasn't someone who had learned basic navigation from a hiking guide. This was someone who understood military movement at an advanced level. "Where did you learn tactical movement?" he asked quietly, his question carrying the weight of genuine curiosity rather than hostile interrogation. Victoria's answer was the same as before, delivered with the same quiet humility. "Practice, sir." But the word carried different weight now, in the context of everything they had witnessed. What kind of practice produced this level of competence? What kind of training created skills that exceeded those of career soldiers? Cross had heard enough. His encrypted phone buzzed with an incoming message that made his expression harden. "Target identified. Highest priority. Maintain surveillance and prepare for immediate extraction." The message confirmed his worst fears. Shadow Protocol didn't issue highest priority designations lightly. They were reserved for individuals who posed existential threats to ongoing operations. If Victoria Kane was who they suspected, her presence at Fort Braxton wasn't coincidental. Derek's psychological profile was becoming increasingly evident as the situation evolved. His need to dominate, to control, to be the alpha in every situation, was driving him to escalate beyond reason. The fact that Victoria remained submissive in manner while demonstrating superior competence was creating a cognitive dissonance that his mind couldn't process healthily. "I think," Derek said slowly, his voice taking on a dangerous quality, "that it's time for a more thorough inspection. Strip search procedures. Make sure our guest isn't carrying anything that might be dangerous to base security." The words hit the canteen like a physical blow. Thompson's head snapped around, his face darkening with anger. "Sergeant, you are way out of line." "Am I, sir?" Derek replied, his tone respectful but carrying an undertone of challenge. "We have an unidentified individual with advanced combat training, questionable credentials, and demonstrated weapons proficiency. At what point does prudent security override social niceties?" Garcia stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to support Derek while positioning herself as the voice of female solidarity. "I could conduct the search, sir. Keep it professional. Make sure there are no irregularities." The offer was made with false concern, but the malicious anticipation in Garcia's eyes was unmistakable. She had been building toward this moment, the ultimate humiliation that would restore the proper order of things. Anderson felt something twist in his stomach as he realized where this was heading. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory, talking about the difference between following orders and doing what was right. "Sir, this isn't necessary. She's cooperated with everything we've asked." "Private Anderson," Derek said, his voice carrying a warning, "you seem to have strong opinions about how we should handle security procedures. Maybe you'd like to explain to the colonel why you think protocol should be ignored?" It was a direct challenge to Anderson's military career, delivered with the kind of calculated precision that Derek specialized in. Follow orders and watch an innocent woman be humiliated, or stand up for what was right and face the consequences. Thompson felt the situation spiraling beyond his control, his command authority being undermined by Derek's aggressive interpretation of security protocols. The technical justifications were sound enough to provide cover, but the malicious intent was clear to anyone with eyes. "I'll need to consult with," Thompson began, but Victoria's voice cut through the tension with unexpected clarity. "It's fine," she said, her voice carrying a quality that made everyone in the room turn to look at her. "If Sergeant Blackwood believes a search is necessary for base security, I'll comply." The words were spoken with such calm acceptance that they seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Victoria's posture remained submissive, but something in her tone suggested this capitulation wasn't defeat. It was a choice. Derek's face lit up with predatory satisfaction, interpreting her compliance as final victory. "Outstanding. Garcia, conduct the search. Make it thorough." But Cross felt a chill run down his spine as he watched Victoria's reaction. Her body language remained submissive, almost defeated. But her eyes... There was something in her eyes that suggested Derek had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. Thompson recognized it too, the subtle shift from victim to something else entirely. In 30 years of military service, he had learned to read the signs that preceded violence, and every instinct he possessed was suddenly screaming warnings. "Wait," Thompson said, his voice carrying sudden urgency. "I think we should—" "No, sir," Victoria interrupted gently, her hands moving to the buttons of her oversized uniform jacket. "The sergeant is right. If there are questions about my authorization to be here, they should be resolved through proper procedures." Her fingers found the first button, and Derek's smile widened with anticipation. Garcia stepped forward with the eager satisfaction of someone about to deliver a decisive blow. The watching crowd pressed closer, phones recording, everyone anticipating the moment when the pretense would finally be stripped away. Derek managed his financial portfolio through an encrypted tablet system, where he maintained investment accounts and life insurance policies valued in the millions. Given the high-risk nature of military careers, ensuring financial security for family members through specialized military insurance packages and long-term investment funds represented a top priority. These financial products were specifically designed for military personnel, offering comprehensive coverage and special benefits for active duty service members facing dangerous deployments. But Anderson noticed something the others missed. As Victoria's jacket began to come undone, her breathing had changed. The rapid, shallow breaths of fear had been replaced by something else entirely. The measured, controlled breathing patterns used in combat situations to maintain heart rate and ensure optimal performance under stress. Cross activated his phone one final time, sending a brief message that would set events in motion. "Target preparing to reveal identity. Request immediate backup and extraction protocols." The response was instant. "Negative. Maintain surveillance only. Do not interfere regardless of circumstances." Victoria's jacket fell away, leaving her standing in the fitted gray t-shirt that emphasized both her delicate build and the unexpected definition of someone in peak physical condition. The fabric clung to muscles that spoke of intensive training, of a body honed for purposes that civilian life couldn't explain. "Now the shirt," Derek ordered, his voice thick with anticipation. Victoria's hands moved to the hem of her gray t-shirt, her movements calm and deliberate, despite the hostile attention focused on her. Around the canteen, conversations had stopped entirely. The usual Friday evening chaos replaced by the tense anticipation that precedes revelation. Thompson felt his unease crystallizing into genuine alarm as he watched Victoria's complete lack of fear or embarrassment. In his experience, innocent civilians faced with public humiliation displayed predictable reactions: tears, anger, desperate attempts to preserve dignity. Victoria displayed none of these. Instead, there was something in her posture, in the way she held herself, that reminded Thompson of elite operators he had encountered in classified briefings. It was the kind of deadly calm that came from absolute confidence in one's own capabilities. "Sergeant," Thompson said, his voice carrying new urgency, I'm ordering you to stand down. But Derek was beyond listening to orders, his psychological need to dominate overriding military discipline. Sir, the search is already in progress. We need to see this through. Garcia positioned herself for optimal viewing angle, her phone ready to capture what she assumed would be the ultimate humiliation. Miller and the others pressed closer, their expressions mixing cruel anticipation with the uncomfortable excitement of witnessing someone else's destruction. Only Anderson seemed to recognize that something was terribly wrong. His grandfather's combat instincts inherited through blood and training screaming warnings that he couldn't quite articulate. Cross watched from his position near the exit, his trained eye cataloging every detail of Victoria's behavior. The complete absence of fear, the measured breathing, the way her eyes continued to track potential threats even while appearing submissive. It all pointed to a conclusion that Shadow Protocol had suspected but hadn't dared confirm. Victoria's hands gripped the hem of her t-shirt, and the entire canteen held its breath. Derek's smile reached its maximum width. Garcia's phone focused for optimal recording, and 200 soldiers prepared to witness what they assumed would be the final destruction of a pretentious civilian. None of them realized they were about to see something that would change their understanding of power, identity, and the dangerous assumption that strength always announces itself. Are you holding your breath right now? Because I can feel the tension building through the screen. If this story has you completely hooked and dying to know what happens when that uniform comes off, show some love with that thumbs up. The next few minutes are going to be absolutely explosive. Victoria began to lift her shirt, revealing first the toned muscles of her abdomen, then the defined lines of someone whose physical conditioning went far beyond civilian fitness standards. But it was what lay beyond, hidden beneath the fabric, that would transform every assumption in the room. In the corner of the canteen, Cross made his final assessment and began moving toward the exit. Whatever was about to be revealed, Shadow Protocol had given him clear instructions. Observe, record, and retreat. The highest priority classification meant that direct engagement was forbidden, regardless of circumstances. Thompson felt time slowing as he watched Victoria's movements. Every instinct developed over 3 decades of military service, screaming that they were all about to witness something that would have consequences far beyond a simple base incident. Derek's confidence had reached its peak, his psychological need for dominance finally about to be satisfied through the complete humiliation of someone who had dared to challenge his authority. But Victoria's expression remained serene, almost peaceful, as if she had been waiting for exactly this moment. Her hands continued their steady progress, lifting the gray fabric that concealed whatever truth lay beneath. The gray t-shirt rose higher, revealing more of Victoria's remarkably conditioned torso. But it was the growing glimpse of something dark against her skin that began to capture attention. Not injury or imperfection, but the edge of something deliberate, something that spoke of meaning and significance beyond casual decoration. Derek's breathing had become audible as his anticipation reached fever pitch, while Garcia's phone remained focused with predatory intensity. The watching crowd pressed closer, their collective attention creating a pressure that should have been overwhelming for any normal person. But Victoria Kane was becoming increasingly clear that she was not any normal person. As the fabric cleared her lower back, the first details of what lay beneath began to emerge. Intricate black lines that spoke of professional artistry, of hours spent under the needle creating something that was part art, part declaration, part warning. The room held its breath as more of the tattoo became visible. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was a masterpiece of black ink that seemed to absorb light itself. 2 massive dragons, one dark as midnight, one gleaming like polished bone, their serpentine bodies intertwined in perfect yin-yang symmetry across her entire back. The artistry was breathtaking, each scale individually detailed, each claw sharp enough to seem real, each eye burning with an intensity that made the artwork seem alive. But it was the flames that truly captured attention. Intricate tongues of fire surrounded the dragons, each flame rendered with such precision that they seemed to dance and flicker in the fluorescent lighting. The entire design covered Victoria's back from shoulder blade to shoulder blade, from the base of her neck to her lower spine. A canvas of skin transformed into something that spoke of power, balance, and deadly purpose. Complete silence descended on the canteen like a physical weight, the kind of silence that comes when the world shifts on its axis and everyone present knows they are witnessing something that will change everything. Private Anderson was the first to break, his voice barely a whisper. "Holy cow, that's the dragon balance." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Every soldier with advanced training knew what Anderson had just identified. The dragon balance was legend, myth, the kind of story told in hushed voices in classified briefings. Only 12 people alive were authorized to wear that marking, and each one represented the absolute pinnacle of military special operations. Colonel Thompson's reaction was instantaneous and decisive. He snapped to full military attention, his hand rising in a crisp salute that belonged in ceremonial reviews. His weathered face had gone pale, but his voice carried the weight of absolute recognition. "Lieutenant Victoria Kane, call sign Ghost Dragon, Navy SEAL Team 6. The formal identification landed like a mortar round in the stunned silence. Derek's face drained of all color, his confident smirk dissolving into an expression of pure horror. Garcia's phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering on the concrete floor with a sound like breaking bones. Miller staggered backward, his hands involuntarily rising as if in surrender. But the reactions were only beginning. As word spread through the canteen, the transformation was spectacular. Soldiers who had been laughing minutes before now stood frozen in place, their phones forgotten, their cruel entertainment transformed into the dawning realization that they had just witnessed something unprecedented. "The dragon balance," someone whispered from the back of the crowd. "Only 12 people alive have that marking." "Ghost Dragon," another voice breathed. "The phantom who saved Echo Company in Afghanistan." The recognition spread like wildfire. Victoria Kane wasn't just any Navy SEAL. She was legend made flesh, one of the most decorated and feared special operators in military history. The woman they had been mocking, the civilian they had been humiliating, was someone whose very existence was classified at levels that made most of their security clearances look like kindergarten hall passes. Derek's psychological breakdown was complete and public. His hands shook as the full weight of what he had done crashed down on him. He had just ordered a Navy SEAL Team 6 operator to strip, had humiliated someone whose service record included operations that had literally shaped the course of international conflicts. That's impossible," he stammered, his voice cracking like an adolescent's. "She can't be. I mean, look at her." But looking at Victoria now, with the dragon balance revealed and her true identity known, everything made terrible sense. The perfect weapons handling, the advanced tactical knowledge, the medical expertise, the complete calm under pressure. It all pointed to exactly what she was. One of the most elite warriors in human history. Garcia struggled to retrieve her phone from the floor, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp it. The video she had been recording would never see the light of day. Filming a classified operator was a federal offense that could result in treason charges. Anderson felt a mixture of vindication and terror. His grandfather's instincts had been right. This woman was someone special, someone who deserved respect. But the scale of what he had witnessed was beyond his comprehension. Thompson maintained his salute, his military bearing absolute despite the chaos around him. "Ma'am, I apologize for the circumstances of this revelation. If I had known..." "At ease, Colonel," Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying a new authority that seemed to fill the entire space. "You couldn't have known. That was the point." She lowered her t-shirt with the same calm precision she had used for everything else, covering the dragon balance but leaving the knowledge of its presence burned into every mind in the room. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to command, to life or death decisions, to operations that existed in the shadows between peace and war. "My orders were to observe and assess base security protocols under deep cover," she continued, her explanation delivered with clinical precision. "Sergeant Blackwood's behavior has provided extensive data." The implications were staggering. This hadn't been a case of mistaken identity or accidental humiliation. Victoria Kane had been here intentionally, testing the base's personnel, evaluating their character and judgment under stress. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every moment of mockery had been documented and assessed by someone whose recommendations could reshape military careers. Derek's knees buckled, and he sank into a nearby chair, his face buried in his hands. The career he had built, the reputation he had cultivated, the future he had planned, all of it was gone, destroyed by his own arrogance and cruelty. Miller managed to find his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. "Ma'am, we didn't know. If we had realized, would it have mattered?" Victoria asked, her question cutting through the noise of desperate apologies. Should respect be conditional on rank or reputation? Should basic human dignity depend on someone's ability to fight back? The questions hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, unanswerable because everyone present knew the truth. Their behavior had revealed exactly who they were when they thought there would be no consequences. Cross had reached the exit, but he paused to send one final message. Identity confirmed. Ghost Dragon operational and aware. Recommend immediate mission abort. The response was swift and decisive. Understood. Extract immediately. All operations suspended. Shadow Protocol had just learned that their 3-month surveillance operation had been compromised from the beginning. They hadn't been hunting Victoria Kane. She had been hunting them. But even as Cross disappeared into the night, his mission in ruins, the consequences of the evening's events were only beginning to unfold. The video recordings, the witness testimonies, the documented behavior of base personnel, all of it would find its way into reports that would reach the highest levels of military command. Colonel Thompson accessed his secure training database system, where he maintained educational courses on leadership and legal frameworks designed for senior military officers. These comprehensive programs covered strategic planning, international law, and advanced management techniques, developed by leading experts from prestigious military academies and law schools. Educational investment in career development represented the key to advancement in military hierarchy and civilian leadership positions. Within hours, Derek Blackwood would be stripped of his sergeant stripes and confined to quarters pending a full investigation. Garcia would face formal charges for conduct unbecoming, her military career effectively over. Miller would be transferred to the most remote posting available, his advancement prospects permanently destroyed. But the changes would extend far beyond individual punishments. Fort Braxton would implement new protocols, training programs designed to prevent the kind of systematic harassment that had been exposed. The Pentagon would review policies across all installations, using Victoria's experience as a case study in how unconscious bias and toxic leadership could compromise military effectiveness. The Ghost Dragon Protocol would become standard procedure. Regular assessments by undercover operatives, designed to identify and eliminate the kind of cultural problems that could undermine unit cohesion and military readiness. Most importantly, the story would spread throughout the military community, becoming legend. The tale of the small woman who had endured mockery and humiliation before revealing herself as one of the most elite warriors in human history would be told and retold, a reminder that strength comes in many forms and respect should never be conditional. As the canteen slowly began to empty, soldiers filing out in stunned silence, Victoria Kane stood in the center of the chaos she had created, simply by being herself. The dragon balance remained hidden beneath her shirt, but its presence had changed everything. Anderson approached her carefully, his young face serious with the weight of what he had witnessed. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say, thank you for the lesson." Victoria looked at him for a long moment, seeing something in his character that reminded her why she had chosen to serve. "You stood up when it mattered, Private. That's not a lesson. That's leadership." Thompson cleared his throat, his formal demeanor struggling with the enormity of what had just occurred. "Ma'am, I'll need to file a report about tonight's events. The assessment of base personnel, the security protocols, the irregularities in chain of command." "Of course, Colonel," Victoria replied. "I'll have my report to command by 0800 hours. She paused, looking around the nearly empty canteen, at the overturned chairs and scattered phones, at the evidence of how quickly certainty could become chaos. "One more thing," she added, her voice carrying a note that made everyone present lean forward to listen. "This assessment isn't complete. My mission parameters extend beyond Fort Braxton, beyond this single installation." The implication was clear. What had happened here was part of something larger, a systematic evaluation of military culture and leadership that would have consequences reaching far beyond one base in one state. As Victoria Kane walked toward the exit, her combat boots clicking against the concrete floor with the measured cadence of someone accustomed to patrol, she left behind a room full of people whose understanding of power, respect, and identity had been fundamentally altered. The small woman with trembling hands had proven herself to be something far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. And in doing so, she had delivered a lesson that would resonate through the military community for years to come. But even as the immediate crisis resolved itself, even as careers ended and new protocols began, Victoria knew that her work was far from over. The encrypted phone in her pocket would ring soon, carrying orders for the next phase of an operation that spanned continents and reached into the deepest shadows of international conflict. The dragon balance on her back was more than just a tattoo. It was a promise, a commitment to a kind of warfare that most people couldn't imagine, and fewer still could survive. And somewhere in the darkness beyond Fort Braxton, forces were already moving in response to what Shadow Protocol had discovered. The hunter had become the hunted, and Victoria Kane would need every skill she possessed to survive what came next. But that was a battle for another day. Tonight, she had accomplished her mission, delivered her message, and reminded everyone present that the most dangerous people in the world are often the ones you never see coming. The ghost had revealed herself, and the world would never be quite the same. The aftermath of Victoria's revelation rippled through Fort Braxton like shockwaves from a detonation. Within minutes of her identity being confirmed, the carefully constructed social hierarchy of the base began to crumble. Derek Blackwood sat motionless in his chair, his face buried in his hands, while around him the reality of his situation crystallized with brutal clarity. Garcia's hands shook as she tried to delete the video files from her phone, but Anderson gently placed a hand on her wrist. "It's too late for that, Lieutenant," he said quietly. "The damage is done." Indeed it was. The canteen, which had been filled with 200 witnesses to Derek's systematic humiliation of a Navy SEAL, was now a crime scene of sorts. Every phone that had recorded the encounter, every laugh that had been captured, every moment of cruelty, all of it would become evidence in what Thompson already knew would be the most significant disciplinary action in Fort Braxton's history. Victoria stood in the center of the chaos with an almost supernatural calm, her gray t-shirt once again concealing the dragon balance tattoo that had changed everything. But even covered, the knowledge of its presence seemed to radiate from her, transforming how everyone in the room perceived her mere existence. "Ma'am," Thompson said, his voice carrying 30 years of command authority tempered by genuine respect. "I need to understand the scope of your mission here. Are we dealing with a security assessment, a disciplinary investigation, or something larger?" Victoria's blue eyes met his steadily, and Thompson found himself looking into depths that spoke of operations he would never be cleared to know about. "All of the above, Colonel. Fort Braxton was selected as a test case for a Pentagon-wide initiative to identify and eliminate toxic leadership patterns that compromise unit effectiveness." The implications hit Thompson like a physical blow. This wasn't just about Derek's behavior or Garcia's complicity. This was about systematic cultural problems that threatened military readiness at the highest levels. "How long have you been here?" Thompson asked, dreading the answer. 3 months, 2 weeks, 4 days. Victoria replied with the precision that characterized everything about her. Every interaction, every incident, every demonstration of leadership or lack thereof has been documented and analyzed. Miller, who had been standing frozen since the tattoo revelation, finally found his voice. "You've been watching us, all of us, for months." "Yes," Victoria confirmed simply. "The weapons testing, the tactical scenarios, the medical demonstrations, those were all assessments of how you would react when you believed you held power over someone you perceived as inferior." Garcia's face had gone ashen as she realized the full scope of what had transpired. The video files, the social media posts, Oh God, what have we done? You've revealed exactly who you are when you think there won't be consequences, Victoria said, her voice carrying no anger, only clinical assessment. That information is far more valuable than any formal evaluation could provide. Anderson stepped forward, his young face serious with understanding. Ma'am, the others who showed respect, who tried to intervene, they were being evaluated too, weren't they? Everyone was being evaluated, Private, Victoria confirmed. Leadership isn't just about rank or position. It's about character under pressure, about doing what's right when it's difficult, about standing up for others when they can't stand up for themselves. The lesson was becoming clear to everyone present. This hadn't been a case of mistaken identity or accidental revelation. It had been the most sophisticated leadership assessment any of them had ever encountered. Derek finally raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed and haunted. My career is over, isn't it? Victoria studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. That depends entirely on what you do next, Sergeant. The question isn't whether you made mistakes. It's whether you're capable of learning from them. The statement hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Derek's psychological profile, shaped by abandonment trauma and a desperate need for control, had led him to this moment of complete humiliation. But even now, Victoria was offering him a choice: collapse under the weight of his failures, or find a way to rebuild himself into something better. Thompson felt his respect for Victoria deepening as he watched her handle the situation. Lesser people would have demanded immediate punishment, would have reveled in the reversal of fortune. Instead, she was conducting what amounted to a masterclass in leadership, teaching even in the moment of her triumph. What happens now? Thompson asked, his question encompassing not just the immediate situation, but the broader implications for Fort Braxton and military culture as a whole. Now we begin the real work, Victoria replied. The assessment phase is complete. The transformation phase begins immediately. She pulled a secure tablet from her bag, its military-grade encryption and reinforced construction, marking it as equipment that existed far beyond standard issue. Her fingers moved across the screen with practiced efficiency, accessing databases and communication networks that operated in the deepest shadows of military intelligence. Colonel Thompson, you'll receive new training protocols within 48 hours, she continued, her voice taking on the crisp authority of someone delivering operational orders. These protocols will be implemented base-wide, with compliance monitored by ongoing assessment teams. Assessment teams? Garcia asked weakly. Did you think I was working alone? Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Navy SEAL Team 6 doesn't operate in isolation. There are currently 15 deep-cover operatives conducting similar assessments at installations across the continental United States, with additional teams deployed overseas. The scope of the operation was staggering. What they had witnessed wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a systematic evaluation of military culture that spanned the entire armed forces. The implications reached into every corner of military life, from basic training to elite special operations. Miller felt his legs weaken as the full weight of realization hit him. The others, the ones who laughed, who recorded, who participated, we're all going to face consequences, aren't we? Consequences commensurate with your actions, Victoria confirmed. But more importantly, you're all going to face opportunities. Opportunities to demonstrate that you're capable of growth, of change, of becoming the kind of leaders this military needs. Anderson found himself studying Victoria with growing admiration. She wasn't just a warrior or an operator, she was an educator, someone who understood that true victory came not from destroying your enemies, but from transforming them into allies. What about him? Garcia asked, nodding toward Derek, who remained slumped in his chair like a broken marionette. Victoria walked over to Derek, her combat boots clicking against the concrete floor with measured precision. When she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only he could hear, but those nearby caught fragments of what she said. Trauma doesn't excuse behavior, but it can explain it. Choice to be better. Grandfather's abandonment doesn't have to define. Derek's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. "How do you know about my grandfather?" "I know about everyone here," Victoria replied simply. "Your psychological profile, your family history, your motivations and fears. All of it was analyzed before I ever set foot on this base. Understanding people is part of understanding how to help them change." The revelation that Victoria had been working with detailed psychological profiles of every person on base added another layer to the sophistication of her operation. This wasn't just military assessment. It was psychological warfare conducted with surgical precision. Thompson accessed his secure training database system, where he maintained educational courses on leadership and legal frameworks designed for senior military officers. These comprehensive programs covered strategic planning, international law, and advanced management techniques, developed by leading experts from prestigious military academies and law schools. Educational investment in career development represented the key to advancement in military hierarchy and civilian leadership positions. "Ma'am," Thompson said, his voice carrying new understanding. "The psychological profiling, the extended surveillance, the coordinated assessment across multiple installations. This is bigger than a Pentagon initiative, isn't it?" Victoria's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes that suggested Thompson was asking exactly the right questions. "Some operations exist at classification levels that don't officially exist, Colonel. What I can tell you is that the threats facing this country aren't just external anymore." The implication was chilling. Internal threats, cultural rot within the military itself, leadership failures that could compromise national security. These were the enemies that couldn't be fought with conventional weapons or traditional tactics. "The dragon balance," Anderson said suddenly, pieces clicking together in his mind. "It's not just about being an elite operator. It's about being a guardian, isn't it? Someone who protects the military from itself." Victoria's smile was the first genuinely warm expression she had shown all evening. "Very good, Private. The dragon balance represents the perfect equilibrium between light and shadow, between protection and elimination, between building up and tearing down. We are tasked with preserving what makes the military strong, while excising what makes it weak." Garcia felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the true scope of what they had encountered. Victoria wasn't just a Navy SEAL conducting an assessment. She was part of something that operated beyond normal command structures, beyond conventional military hierarchy. "How many of you are there?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Enough," Victoria replied cryptically. "And after tonight's assessment, there will be more. The Ghost Dragon protocol has proven effective enough to warrant expansion." Cross, who had been monitoring the situation from multiple concealed positions around the base perimeter, received a final encrypted message that made him abandon his surveillance entirely. "Operation compromised. Extraction impossible. Initiate Protocol 7 immediately." Protocol 7 was Shadow Protocol's nuclear option: complete operational shutdown, destruction of all evidence, elimination of compromised assets. The fact that it had been triggered meant that Victoria's revelation had consequences reaching far beyond Fort Braxton. But even as Cross disappeared into the night, his mission in ruins and his organization scrambling to contain the damage, Victoria was already 3 steps ahead. The encrypted tablet in her hands showed real-time tracking of his movements, confirmation that Shadow Protocol's surveillance operation had been turned against them from the very beginning. "Colonel," Victoria said, her attention returning to the immediate situation, "I need you to place the base on lockdown protocols. No one enters or leaves without direct authorization from Pentagon-level command." Thompson's training kicked in automatically. "Security threat level?" "Imminent," Victoria replied. "Shadow Protocol has been operating on this base for months, gathering intelligence on classified personnel and operations. Their surveillance has been compromised, which means they'll move to eliminate evidence and assets." The casual way she mentioned Shadow Protocol made Thompson's blood run cold. He'd heard whispers of such organizations in classified briefings, rogue intelligence networks that operated in the spaces between official agencies, selling information to the highest bidder without regard for national security. "How imminent?" he asked, already reaching for his secure communication device. "They're here now," Victoria said simply. The words had barely left her lips when the lights in the canteen flickered and died, plunging the space into darkness broken only by the emergency lighting that kicked in automatically. But instead of panic, Victoria's voice cut through the darkness with calm authority. Everyone remain exactly where you are. Do not move, do not make noise, do not activate any electronic devices. Her command was delivered with such absolute confidence that even Derek, lost in his psychological breakdown, froze in place. Anderson felt his grandfather's combat instincts surge to life, every nerve ending screaming that they were in mortal danger. In the darkness, Victoria moved like liquid shadow, her position shifting so silently that even those standing nearby couldn't track her movements. When she spoke again, her voice came from a completely different location. Private Anderson, you're going to be my communication relay. On my signal, you'll contact base security and provide the authentication code I'm about to give you. Anderson's throat was dry, but his voice remained steady. Yes, ma'am. Tango 77 Echo. Tell them Ghost Dragon is active and requesting immediate tactical support for hostile extraction. The authentication code meant nothing to Anderson, but he committed it to memory with the kind of focus that combat situations demanded. Around him, he could hear others breathing in the darkness, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Victoria's tablet glowed softly as she accessed systems that didn't appear on any organizational chart. The screen showed heat signatures moving around the base perimeter, tactical formations that spoke of professional military training. Shadow Protocol hadn't sent amateurs for this operation. How many? Thompson whispered, his own combat experience allowing him to read the tactical display over Victoria's shoulder. 12 confirmed, Victoria replied. Possibly more in reserve positions. They're moving to secure the communications center and the command post. Garcia felt her training assert itself despite the chaos of the evening's revelations. Ma'am, if they're moving on communications and command, they're planning to isolate the base before conducting elimination operations. Correct, Victoria confirmed, which means we have approximately 8 minutes before they reach this building. The timeline was impossibly tight, but Victoria moved with the kind of calm efficiency that came from facing similar situations countless times before. Her hands flew across the tablet, sending encrypted messages to resources that existed in the deepest shadows of special operations. Backup is en route, she announced, but it won't arrive for 15 minutes. We need to hold this position and protect these witnesses until support arrives. Anderson felt a surge of pride mixed with terror as he realized they had transitioned from disciplinary situation to active combat operation. The small woman who had been mocked and humiliated was now orchestrating a defense against professional killers. Ma'am, Miller said, his weapons specialist training overcoming his shock. We're not equipped for defensive operations. The base armory is 3 buildings away, and if they've secured the communications center, we work with what we have, Victoria replied. This isn't about superior firepower. It's about superior positioning and tactics. She began moving through the darkened canteen, her hands finding objects that could be repurposed as defensive tools. A chair became an improvised barrier. A fire extinguisher became a chemical weapon. A serving tray became a shield. Each item was positioned with the kind of tactical thinking that transformed civilian space into defensive terrain. Derek, watching Victoria's preparations from his position of despair, felt something stir in him that had been dormant since his childhood trauma. This was what real leadership looked like. Not the domination and control he had practiced, but the kind of calm competence that inspired others to rise above their limitations. What can I do? He asked quietly, his voice carrying a humility that had been completely absent from his earlier behavior. Victoria paused in her preparations, studying Derek's face in the dim emergency lighting. What she saw there, genuine remorse, desperate desire for redemption, willingness to sacrifice for others, made her decision easy. You can help Private Anderson with communications, she said. Your knowledge of base security protocols will be essential for coordinating with friendly forces. It was a small task, but Derek seized on it with the gratitude of someone who had been offered a chance at redemption. For the first time in hours, he had a purpose that extended beyond his own failures. Holy cow, did you see that coming? If Victoria's revelation just left you speechless, Wait until you hear about the female Marine who walked into a biker bar and made every Hell's Angel kneel. That story is dropping next week, so subscribe now and prepare for another mind-blowing journey. The tactical situation developed rapidly as Shadow Protocol's forces moved into position around the canteen. Victoria's tablet showed them establishing overlapping fields of fire, securing escape routes, and preparing for a coordinated assault that would leave no survivors. "They're not planning to take prisoners," she said quietly, her assessment delivered with clinical precision. "This is an elimination operation designed to remove all witnesses to their surveillance activities." Thompson felt his protective instincts surge as he looked around at the soldiers under his command. These weren't elite operators or special forces personnel. They were regular army, trained for conventional warfare, not the kind of shadow conflict that Victoria operated in. "Ma'am, with respect, most of these soldiers aren't prepared for this level of combat," he said. "If we're facing professional elimination teams, then we give them what they're not expecting," Victoria replied. "They're prepared for military resistance, for conventional tactics and predictable responses. They're not prepared for creative asymmetric warfare." She began distributing tasks with the kind of tactical efficiency that made it clear she had done this before. Garcia was assigned to establish a secondary communication post using emergency protocols. Miller was tasked with creating improvised weapons from kitchen equipment. Anderson would coordinate with base security, while Derek provided intelligence on facility layout and defensive positions. But even as Victoria organized their desperate defense, she was implementing a larger strategy that none of them could see. The encrypted messages she had sent weren't just calling for backup. They were activating a network of assets that had been positioned around Fort Braxton for months. Cross, racing through the darkness toward an extraction point that no longer existed, received a final message that stopped him in his tracks. "All exits compromised. Friendly forces have you surrounded. Surrender or face elimination." The message was accompanied by photographic evidence that made his blood turn to ice. Images of Shadow Protocol operatives in custody, surveillance posts being dismantled, communication networks being shut down. The organization he had served for years was being systematically destroyed by forces he hadn't even known existed. Back in the canteen, Victoria's preparations were reaching completion when her tablet chimed with an incoming priority message. The tactical display showed new signatures approaching the base, not the professional killers of Shadow Protocol, but something else entirely. "Backup has arrived early," she announced, relief evident in her voice for the first time all evening. But when the emergency lighting suddenly blazed to full intensity and the main doors burst open, what entered wasn't a standard military response team. Instead, figures in full tactical gear moved with the fluid precision of elite operators, their movements coordinated to the point of seeming choreographed. "Ghost Dragon, status report," the lead figure called out, their voice carrying the authority of command. "Area secure. Casualties nil. Witnesses protected," Victoria replied, her response delivered in the crisp military terminology that belonged to classified operations. Anderson watched in amazement as Victoria's backup revealed themselves to be other operators bearing the same dragon balance marking, their tattoos visible as they secured the perimeter and established defensive positions. The canteen had become the center of operations for what was clearly a much larger mission. "Shadow Protocol assets in custody," the team leader reported. "Surveillance network dismantled. Communication intercepts secured. The elimination teams neutralized." The efficiency of the operation was staggering. In less than an hour, an international intelligence network had been identified, infiltrated, and destroyed by forces that operated so far off the official books that their very existence was deniable. Derek, listening to the operational briefing with growing understanding, finally grasped the full scope of what he had stumbled into. This wasn't just about military assessment or cultural transformation. This was about protecting the nation from threats that conventional forces couldn't even identify. "Ma'am," he said quietly, approaching Victoria with the kind of respect he should have shown from the beginning. "I understand now why my behavior was so dangerous. It wasn't just about personal cruelty. It was about creating vulnerabilities that enemies could exploit." Victoria studied Derek's face, seeing genuine understanding replacing the arrogance and insecurity that had driven his earlier actions. Exactly, Sergeant. A military that tolerates abuse, that allows toxic leadership to flourish, becomes weak from within. That weakness can be exploited by adversaries who understand that the greatest victories are won without firing a shot. Garcia stepped forward, her own understanding crystallizing as she listened to the exchange. The harassment, the systematic humiliation. It wasn't just wrong, it was a security risk. It created division, resentment, and the kind of cultural problems that foreign intelligence services could manipulate. Every person who feels powerless, who believes the system is rigged against them, becomes a potential asset for hostile forces, Victoria confirmed. Shadow Protocol recruited their sources from among military personnel who felt abandoned by their leadership, who believed they had been treated unfairly by the system they had sworn to serve. Anderson felt pieces clicking together as he realized the true scope of the operation they had witnessed. That's why the assessment was so important, not just to identify bad leaders, but to identify potential security risks before they could be exploited. And to identify good leaders, Victoria added, her gaze moving to Anderson with approval. People who will stand up for what's right, who will protect others, who understand that true strength comes from service rather than domination. Thompson, listening to the exchange with growing appreciation for the sophistication of Victoria's mission, felt his respect for her deepening even further. She wasn't just a warrior or an operator. She was a guardian of the principles that made military service meaningful. The transformation protocols you mentioned, he said, they're designed to create a culture that's resistant to this kind of infiltration, aren't they? Among other things, Victoria confirmed, strong military culture, based on mutual respect and shared values, is the best defense against subversion. When soldiers trust their leaders and believe in their mission, they become immune to the kind of psychological manipulation that Shadow Protocol specialized in. As the tactical team completed their security sweep and began processing evidence from the compromised surveillance network, Victoria turned her attention to the immediate consequences of the evening's events. The assessment phase was complete, but the transformation phase would require careful implementation to avoid creating new problems while solving old ones. "Sergeant Blackwood," she said, her voice carrying the authority of final judgment, "your behavior tonight demonstrated serious leadership failures and psychological issues that require immediate attention. However, your willingness to acknowledge these failures and seek redemption suggests potential for growth." Derek felt hope and terror warring in his chest as he waited for Victoria's verdict. His entire future hung in the balance, dependent on the judgment of someone he had systematically abused for months. "You will be reduced in rank to private and assigned to specialized counseling designed to address the trauma and insecurity that drove your behavior," Victoria continued. "You will also be enrolled in an intensive leadership development program that will either prepare you for future advancement or confirm your unsuitability for military service." It was a harsh sentence, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to rebuild himself into someone worthy of the uniform he wore. Derek accepted it with the gratitude of someone who had expected far worse. "Lieutenant Garcia," Victoria continued, "your participation in systematic harassment and your abuse of authority will result in formal reprimand and demotion to second lieutenant. You will also undergo training designed to address the toxic competitive behaviors that led to your participation in tonight's events." Garcia nodded acceptance, understanding that she was receiving a second chance that many in her position would not have been offered. "Corporal Miller, your technical competence is noted, but your willingness to participate in harassment activities indicates a failure of moral courage that must be addressed. You will receive counseling and additional training in ethical leadership before being considered for future advancement." Miller's relief was palpable as he realized his career wasn't ending, merely being redirected toward becoming the kind of leader the military needed. "Private Anderson," Victoria said, her voice warming as she addressed the young soldier who had stood up when it mattered. "Your moral courage and willingness to intervene on behalf of someone you perceived as vulnerable demonstrates exactly the kind of character this military needs. You are hereby recommended for accelerated advancement and assignment to specialized leadership development programs." Anderson felt pride surge through him as he realized his decision to stand up for what was right had not only been validated, but rewarded. His grandfather would have been proud. Thompson, watching Victoria dispense justice with surgical precision, recognized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in his 30-year career. This wasn't just disciplinary action. It was a masterclass in leadership development, delivered by someone who understood that true transformation required both accountability and opportunity. As the immediate crisis resolved and the tactical teams completed their operations, Victoria received an encrypted communication that made her expression shift from satisfaction to concern. The message was brief, but its implications were staggering. Ghost Dragon, priority tasking, Shadow Protocol elimination incomplete. High-value target escaped with classified intelligence. Your sister's location compromised. Immediate extraction required. The personal stakes that had been hidden beneath Victoria's professional demeanor suddenly became clear. This wasn't just about military assessment or cultural transformation. It was about family, about people she loved who were now in danger because of her success. Anderson, standing close enough to read the message over her shoulder, felt his blood run cold. "Ma'am, your sister. Is she in danger because of what happened here tonight?" Victoria's expression hardened into something that reminded everyone present why she was one of the most feared operators in the world. "My sister is also Dragon Balance," she said quietly. "She's been conducting similar operations in Eastern Europe. If Shadow Protocol has her location, they'll use her as leverage to force my compliance with their demands." The revelation that Victoria's sister was also an elite operator added another layer to the complexity of the situation. This wasn't just about Fort Braxton or even Shadow Protocol. It was about a global network of threats that required equally global responses. "What are their demands?" Thompson asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer. Victoria's tablet chimed with an incoming message that contained exactly what she had expected and dreaded. A photograph of her sister, bound and unconscious, accompanied by text that made her jaw clench with barely controlled rage. "Surrender yourself to our custody within 72 hours, or watch your sister die slowly. Come alone, or she dies immediately. Any attempt to track or rescue her will result in immediate execution." The message was designed to exploit the one weakness that even elite operators possessed: their love for family, their willingness to sacrifice themselves for those they cared about. But Derek, reading the message with growing understanding of the stakes involved, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Ma'am, with respect, that's exactly what they expect you to do. They're counting on your emotional response, overriding your tactical judgment." Victoria turned to look at Derek, seeing something in his eyes that suggested his psychological training had given him insights into manipulation that could be valuable. "Explain," she said simply. "They're using the same psychological leverage I used against others," Derek said, his voice heavy with self-recognition. "Exploit someone's vulnerabilities, make them feel powerless, force them into choices that serve your interests rather than theirs. The only difference is scale." Garcia found herself nodding as she recognized the pattern Derek had identified. "It's manipulation at the strategic level. They're trying to turn your strength, your loyalty to family, into a weakness that defeats you." Anderson felt pieces clicking together as he realized what Derek and Garcia were suggesting. But if we understand their psychological strategy, we can counter it. Instead of reacting emotionally, we respond tactically. Victoria felt a surge of pride as she watched the soldiers she had been assessing demonstrate exactly the kind of critical thinking that made for effective leadership. They were learning, growing, transforming themselves into better versions of what they had been. "What do you recommend?" she asked, genuinely curious to hear their tactical assessment. Derek stepped forward, his demeanor completely transformed from the arrogant bully he had been hours earlier. "We give them what they expect, your emotional surrender, while delivering what they don't expect, tactical surprise." Miller joined the impromptu planning session, his weapons expertise adding practical considerations to the psychological insights Derek had provided. "They'll expect you to come alone and unarmed. They won't expect you to come with backup positioned for coordinated assault. Thompson found himself impressed by the quality of tactical thinking being displayed by soldiers he had written off as discipline problems. Crisis and proper leadership had revealed capabilities that routine military life had kept hidden. "The Dragon Balance Network," Garcia said suddenly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Your sister isn't the only operator in the field. There are others who can coordinate rescue operations while you provide distraction." Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut diamond as she realized that her assessment of Fort Braxton's personnel had yielded unexpected dividends. These soldiers, properly led and motivated, were demonstrating exactly the kind of creative tactical thinking that elite operations required. "Outstanding analysis," she said, pulling up communication protocols on her tablet. "But you're missing one crucial element of the tactical picture." Anderson leaned forward, eager to understand what they had overlooked. "What's that, ma'am?" "My sister doesn't need rescuing," Victoria said, her smile becoming genuinely warm for the first time all evening. "She needs backup for the counter-operation she's already conducting." The revelation recontextualized everything they thought they understood about the situation. Victoria's sister wasn't a helpless victim awaiting rescue. She was an elite operator conducting her own mission, using Shadow Protocol's arrogance against them. The photograph, the demands, the threat of execution. "It's all theater," Victoria continued. "My sister is exactly where she needs to be to complete the final phase of dismantling Shadow Protocol's network." Derek felt his admiration for the Kane sisters growing as he realized the sophistication of their operation. She allowed herself to be captured. She placed herself in position to be captured at the exact moment when it would provide maximum tactical advantage, Victoria corrected. "There's a significant difference." Thompson shook his head in amazement as he contemplated the level of planning and coordination required for such an operation. "How long have you two been planning this?" 3 years, Victoria replied. "Ever since Shadow Protocol made the mistake of targeting Dragon Balance operatives for elimination. They thought they were hunting us. We've been hunting them." As if summoned by her words, Victoria's encrypted communication device chimed with an incoming priority message from halfway around the world. The text was brief, but decisive. "Package delivered. Network terminated. Coming home. Love you, sis." The message was accompanied by photographic evidence that made even Victoria's tactical team look impressed. Images of Shadow Protocol's leadership in custody, financial networks frozen, communication systems dismantled, and safe houses compromised. The organization that had threatened global security had been systematically destroyed by 2 women working in perfect coordination across continents. Anderson felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the scope of what he had witnessed. "Ma'am, this wasn't just about assessing Fort Braxton. This was about using Fort Braxton as bait to draw Shadow Protocol into a trap." "Correct," Victoria confirmed. Shadow Protocol's obsession with eliminating Dragon Balance operatives made them predictable. They couldn't resist the opportunity to surveil someone they believed was isolated and vulnerable. Garcia's tactical mind was racing as she processed the implications. "You've been using yourself as bait for 3 months, allowing them to gather intelligence while you gathered intelligence on them. And using their surveillance to feed them information that led them exactly where we wanted them to go," Victoria added. "Sometimes the best way to catch predators is to make yourself appear to be perfect prey." Derek found himself studying Victoria with something approaching awe as he realized the mental strength required for such an operation. You had to endure months of harassment, of being underestimated and mocked, all while knowing you could stop it at any time. "That's what made it such an effective test," Victoria replied. "Anyone can maintain their composure when they're in control. The measure of true character is how you behave when you appear to be powerless." Thompson felt pieces of a much larger puzzle clicking into place as he considered the broader implications of Victoria's mission. The other Dragon Balance operatives, the assessments at other installations. This is all part of a systematic evaluation of military culture and security vulnerabilities. "The military faces threats that don't wear uniforms or carry flags," Victoria confirmed. "Cultural rot, toxic leadership, systematic abuse. These create vulnerabilities that hostile forces can exploit. The Dragon Balance program exists to identify and eliminate these threats before they can compromise national security. As the evening's events reached their resolution, Victoria began the process of transitioning from covert operative back to official military personnel. The encrypted devices disappeared into secure pouches, the tactical gear was secured, and the dragon tattoo was once again hidden beneath her gray t-shirt. But the transformation she had catalyzed at Fort Braxton would continue long after her departure. The soldiers who had witnessed her revelation would carry the lessons forward, implementing the cultural changes that would make their institution stronger and more resilient. Derek approached Victoria as she prepared to leave, his demeanor completely transformed from the arrogant bully he had been at the beginning of the evening. "Ma'am, I know I don't deserve it, but I want to thank you for giving me a chance to be better." Victoria studied his face, seeing genuine change in someone who had been consumed by toxic patterns of behavior. "Everyone deserves a chance to grow, Sergeant. Excuse me, Private. The question is whether you'll take advantage of the opportunity you've been given." Garcia joined them, her own transformation evident in the way she carried herself. "Ma'am, the training protocols you mentioned, will we be involved in implementing them?" "If you prove worthy of the responsibility," Victoria replied. "Cultural change doesn't happen from the top down. It happens when individuals at every level commit to being better than they were." Anderson felt compelled to ask the question that had been nagging at him all evening. "Ma'am, will we see you again? Will you be coming back to check on our progress?" Victoria's smile was enigmatic as she shouldered her gear bag. "Dragon Balance operatives are everywhere, Private. We're watching, we're evaluating, and we're ready to intervene when necessary. The question isn't whether you'll see us, it's whether you'll recognize us when you do." As Victoria walked toward the exit, her combat boots clicking against the concrete floor with measured precision, Thompson called out one final question. "Ma'am, what should we tell people about what happened here tonight?" Victoria paused at the threshold, looking back at the room full of soldiers whose lives had been fundamentally changed by their encounter with her. "Tell them the truth, Colonel. Tell them that respect isn't conditional on rank or appearance. Tell them that true strength comes from protecting others, not dominating them. Tell them that the most dangerous people in the world are often the ones you never see coming." She stepped into the darkness beyond the canteen doors, but her voice carried back with crystal clarity. "And tell them that someone is always watching." The silence that followed Victoria's departure was profound, filled with the weight of transformation and the promise of change. Derek, Garcia, Miller, and Anderson looked at each other with new understanding, each processing the lessons they had learned about leadership, character, and the true meaning of military service. Thompson felt the responsibility of implementing Victoria's vision settling on his shoulders like a mantle of command. The cultural transformation of Fort Braxton would begin immediately, but it would take years to complete. Every decision, every promotion, every disciplinary action would be guided by the principles Victoria had demonstrated, that respect was universal, that character mattered more than rank, and that true leadership meant serving others rather than dominating them. As the soldiers began to file out of the canteen, their conversations subdued by the magnitude of what they had witnessed, Anderson lingered behind to help clean up the chaos that had been created by the evening's revelations. Overturned chairs, scattered phones, spilled drinks, all evidence of how quickly certainty could become chaos when fundamental assumptions were challenged. But as he worked, Anderson couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Victoria had spoken of a network of operatives, of ongoing assessments, of threats that required constant vigilance. The Dragon Balance tattoo wasn't just a mark of elite status, it was a symbol of eternal responsibility, of guardians who protected not just physical territory, but the principles that made military service meaningful. Somewhere in the darkness beyond Fort Braxton, Victoria Kane was already moving toward her next mission, her next assessment, her next opportunity to identify and eliminate the threats that could compromise everything she had sworn to protect. The ghost had revealed herself, delivered her message, and disappeared back into the shadows where she belonged. But the echoes of her presence would resonate through Fort Braxton for years to come. A reminder that true power didn't announce itself with noise and arrogance, but worked quietly in the background, protecting and serving without recognition or reward. The dragon balance had been revealed, and the world was a little bit safer for it. 3 months later, Derek, now Private Derek Blackwood, stood in front of a counseling group for military personnel dealing with leadership failures and psychological trauma. His voice was steady as he recounted the events of that Friday evening, but his eyes carried the weight of hard-won wisdom.
"I thought power meant making others feel small," he said to the assembled group of soldiers who were struggling with their own issues. "I thought leadership meant domination and control. It took someone truly powerful to show me how wrong I was." The transformation of Fort Braxton had become a model for military installations across the country. The Ghost Dragon Protocol had been officially implemented as standard procedure, with regular assessments conducted by operatives whose identities remained classified, but whose impact was undeniable. Garcia, now working to rebuild her career after her demotion, had become one of the most effective advocates for cultural change on the base. Her experience of falling from grace had given her unique insights into the psychological factors that drove toxic behavior, and she channeled that understanding into preventing others from making similar mistakes. Miller had discovered a talent for training and development. His technical expertise combined with his personal experience of transformation, making him an effective instructor for junior personnel. He specialized in teaching the kind of critical thinking skills that Victoria had demonstrated, the ability to see beyond surface appearances and recognize true competence. Anderson had been fast-tracked for promotion and leadership development. His moral courage during the confrontation with Derek, marking him as exactly the kind of future leader the military needed. He carried with him the lesson Victoria had taught about standing up for others, and he made sure that lesson was passed on to everyone under his command. Thompson had received commendation for his handling of the situation and his implementation of the new cultural protocols. Fort Braxton had become a showcase for military transformation, a place where respect was universal and character was valued above all other considerations. But perhaps the most profound transformation had occurred in Derek himself. The psychological counseling had forced him to confront the abandonment trauma that had shaped his need for control, while the leadership development program had taught him that true strength came from empowering others rather than dominating them. He still carried the scars of his failure, still faced the consequences of his actions every day, but he had learned to channel those experiences into something positive, using his understanding of toxic behavior to help others avoid the same mistakes. As Derek finished his presentation to the counseling group, one of the participants raised her hand. "Do you ever regret what happened? Do you wish you could go back and handle things